Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome to the Stay Green podcast and NASCAR betting show here on the Bet the Board podcast network. And oh, ladies and gentlemen, did we have nothing but chaos last week in Music City. A NASCAR record 5 green-white checkered flags, and it flipped betting cards completely on their heads. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor, my esteemed colleague and co-host on this very fine program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, if that was the first time you'd ever bet NASCAR, you may want to try and reassess some of your life choices, given how profitable race cards went from being complete bonanzas to going, how do I get out of here and mitigate some of the damage?
Yeah, not the best look for what I thought was a pretty good race for a track and a tire that had very little fall off. And it stinks that it kind of ended like an Xfinity race.
No, that was a truck race. That wasn't even an Xfinity race.
That truck race.
That was a cup race at Indy, or it's a truck race.
Yeah, it's just unfortunately stuff like this is just a part of racing. And it happens, when you look back at this race, I understand the Austin Cindric caution that kind of took us into overtime and put everyone. It's actually the caution before that put them right outside their fuel window that ended up being the ultimate issue. Whenever you have very low fall off or very little fall off in the tire and you have a caution just outside of a fuel window, you're going to get everybody to pit. And if this thing goes more than the scheduled distance, guys are going to be running out. And not that I could see it coming. I thought that Denny was going to be coasting.
You didn't account for 30 plus laps extra in your handicap
and normally,
in bonus racing?
Yeah, to your point, normally it's 3 to 8 extra laps if you have 2 green white checkers, not 30. 30 is a little bit egregious. I mean, that's half a damn fuel run, right? So,
half a damn fuel run for most cars, maybe an eighth of a tank if you're driving the 22 Pennzoil Ford of Joey Logano, who we will get to in a moment. But for those folks who may be tuning into the Stay Green podcast for the first time, we break things up around here. Stage 1, everything that we saw and learned in last week's race and what we can apply going forward. Stage 2, a racing preview. This week, it's all about the street circuit in the Grant Park 165 in Chicago. More about that and the speculative nature of the race. And stage 3, all about trying to make our listeners smarter NASCAR bettors. And I think this will be a little bit longer stage 3 that we've been grown accustomed to, given everything that we saw unfold at Nashville. So Joey Logano, Worm, we find getting the victory lane stretches his fuel unlike anything we've seen in recent memory, nearly 110 laps on that final run. His left side tires hang on for dear life, and Team Penske now has all 3 of their drivers into the NASCAR playoff. We mentioned the 5 green-white checkered flags. We can talk about Denny Hamlin, running down Ross Chastain with the fastest car. I know people out there will tell me Christopher Bell. I beg to differ. I think the 11 was the fastest car in my opinion, and it led to pure unadulterated chaos and that unpredictable nature that even when you handicap a race perfectly, sometimes you have to diversify that portfolio to cover your bases.
Yeah, and to your point, I agree with you that the 11 car was the fastest car. They made 2 mistakes earlier in the race. One major mistake, I feel like, early in the race when right before stage 2, they came down and they took 4 tires. Everyone seemed to take 2, kind of jumped in. They were worried about the volts. And Gabe Hart came on the radio and said, that was an easy 2-tire call. I'm sorry. And then Denny took this 14th, he was restarting 14th and was able to finish stage 2 in 6th. And this was, or right before the weather, he took those and drove up to 6th. And at that point it was, okay, we're back in this race. the fastest race car. That first pit stall was huge. I don't think he lost a spot on pit road. I think it was very consistent, 1 or 2 spots, but it just goes to show you can have the fastest car. You can make one small mistake and it still doesn't matter if the chips fall in some sort of funky way where you find yourself in a fuel fest. These things are hard to win, and credit to this 22 team. I think, man, there are some benefits to being slow. One of them, the biggest part is you just have options, right? You very little risk for a potential large reward. You know,
what does friend of the program Larry Mack always say? If you follow the leader, you're always going to follow the leader.
You're always going to follow the leader. So it gives them options, for one, because you have to do something else, and 2, you're not going to wear your tires very much because you're not running as fast. You're not exerting as much force in the corners. I know that sounds crazy, but those things start to add up when you're coming down to racing on fumes. And when your car is slower, you're not going to have an issue with RPMs, burning a lot of fuel. So for the same reason that at Loudon, or let's just say Chicago last year, fuel wasn't as much of an issue because when it's raining, like it was raining at Loudon, guys aren't going back to the gas as quickly. You have more off throttle time, which is going to help your fuel mileage. So if you're running back there in 14th to 20th, which is what we saw the 22 most of the day doing, he was able to save some fuel. Now, I was still shocked he made it.
I think he was shocked, and I think Paul Wolf was shocked as well.
I think everyone was kind of shocked because there's a lot of cars that could afford to lose spots pitted because they were running out of fuel. You look at Denny Hamlin is a perfect example of that, where he just said, you know what, I have the wins, but I don't want a 25th place finish. You know, when you have that many cautions back to back, you're going to end up with some wave around cars. You end up with a lot of cars on the lead lap. Now, the way that this played out, there ended up being a lot of cars just got wrecked. You know, probably millions of dollars of cars worth of cars got wrecked in green, white checkers. So, you know, hats off to that 22 team. They got it done, and they held off Tyler Reddick, which I did not think was going to be possible when after one lap, when Tyler Reddick kind of got into second, I thought there is no way. I think he had something like 20-something lap fresher tires. I know tires didn't matter, but man, Logano does a great job of making that car wide, and he's able to hang on, and he's going to the playoffs. And I can't imagine that even if you're at the top of this favorites, whether you're Bell, Larson, Hamlin, you don't want to see Logano there. I mean, he's won 2 championships, and Penske's figured it out the last 2 years. So definitely a little bit of a wrench that's been thrown into the playoff picture, but it kind of incredible finish for that 22 team.
And you mentioned some of the variants you get in race in terms of how the outright card can shift in matchups. I mean, we look at 2 of those late race cautions. We gave out Kyle Larson as our best bet on the podcast. He ends up wrecking Ross Chastain, puts the 1 out of the race, and allows the 5 to go on to win. And then, of course, we kind of tipped up indirectly Denny Hamlin, thinking that he was the best pre-week outright bet that was there. Ironically enough, it's a caution from Austin Cindric, who we faded in our race day best bet with Noah Gragson when the 2 of them are racing side
together.
By side. That ends up getting home there. So sometimes, like we said, the gambling gods smile upon you. They take one that robbed Peter to pay Paul, but it's why it's so important when you're building out these race cards that regardless of how you feel about a particular driver or 2, you never want to try and create too much leverage on a guy unless that's the way you're going to build your cards all season, and you're perfectly comfortable winning big when things hit, but potentially losing big on weeks where things don't exactly go your way. We'll wave the green-white checkered flag here ourselves and know there will not be 5 overtime restarts here as we put a bow on stage 1. And we head towards the handicap of Chicago. And last year, Werme, it was the first year we went to the Chicago street course. The Xfinity race couldn't even get to halfway. They shortened the Cup race. We're dealing with rain. It was unmitigated disaster for what should have been a flagship race and an opportunity to try and explore it. So for me, I look at it, and while people can talk about SVG, and rightfully so, Alan Cavanna said he thought he had a shot on this very podcast at 100 to 1 that it was worth having a little bit of exposure, goes out there and wins the race. I almost feel as we go back to Chicago with a truly blank slate again, because practice is going to feel different in the dry. We know the race distance, which has officially been shortened, and rightfully so. So when I ask the question of how much do we take from road course racing and apply it to the street course, and did we learn anything last year that we can truly and confidently apply to the pre-week positions that we may want to build for this weekend's race?
I don't think so. I think this is as blind, with the exception of just maybe a few drivers. We're as blind going into this year as we were last year. We started in the rain, wet weather tires. There's a chance that maybe Denny Hamlin had the best car and he couldn't make it 2 laps without sliding into the tires. And
Denny was the first one to admit this week on Action's Detrimental that he drove scared and watched Tyler Reddick go zipping right by him.
Yeah, I think this is not a race I had circled as the best betting opportunity. This is going to be one of those where I think you pick your spots. I would not fall in love with matchups just because you go off track and you have to wait for the entire field to pass you before you kind of bring up the rear. I think you take a few shots at some drivers you think have a legit chance at winning the race. But this is not going to be a race where we're overly invested at all. Maybe pick a handful of drivers at the most for some, whether it's some derivative stuff or even win markets. I don't know. Matchups do not appeal to me at all this week either. So I don't even know what we can take away from other road courses, to be completely honest. Just who's been fast, who's also taken advantage of a good car at a road course. If it's been in their past, where you look at a guy like Byron, he hasn't shown me a lot of speed lately, but we saw it earlier this year at Coda when he was able to get out front. Sure, he was a great car. So you can say the same thing about Truex, Dinger, and all sorts of other drivers. But everyone just take a step back. We're going to a street course. These are NASCAR drivers. Not exactly what I would call a great betting opportunity.
Yeah, one thing I will say for those folks who tune into the race when it starts, if you see a driver that you've bet either in the outright market or in a head-to-head matchup and that driver goes careening into the tire barrier, which inevitably will happen, last year it wasn't a death knell. Drivers were able to get themselves out of harm's way. They came out, whether it was Kyle Busch or Chase Elliott, and still turned that into somewhat decent finishes. So all is not lost until you know your driver is officially in the garage for good. When we look at the way that odds makers have kind of set some of the prices on this race, Chris, a bunch of familiar names, more or less at the top of the odds board. Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, SVG, all right around 6-1. SVG has come down. Some prominent shops out here in the desert opened him as high as 10. We figured he'd take money. You look at Tyler Reddick at 7-1. And the one thing that some of those drivers have in common is that they've been accomplished on road courses. Chris Bell comes in the best current form. He's won a series high 9 stages so far this season, and he's led nearly 30% of laps over the last 6 races. We look at Kyle Larson. He is one of the road course winners this year, along with his teammate and William Byron. HMS seems to have a grasp, at least on the road courses, which is somewhat ironic because Chase Elliott was the gold standard and has 7 wins on road courses, which is the most among active drivers, but he doesn't have one during the next-gen era. His price at 10-1. So when we look at some of those semi-so-called favorites, are there guys that you think offer a little bit of upside that you're intrigued by? And the other question that we always talk about, how short can some of these prices even get for drivers that are already listed at 6-1 before we see a single car hit the track?
Well, I'll address that final question you had. I think that practice and qualifying will obviously be very important, but if we do see someone look really fast in practice and then in qualifying, if it is a Tyler Reddick, an SVG, Chris Bell, Kyle Larson, I would say probably more so SVG, Bell, and Larson. If they look good in practice and pull it, I think we could see a shorter number than we see here, just because it is going to be hard to pass. It's going to be one of those scenarios where once you're in your pit window, you're going to go in pit window for fuel. You're going to pit that one last time, and you're done on pit road. So it will be a very be a track position race, just like most races this week. But you could see someone go off. I think SVG, if he looks really good in practice and qualifies well, maybe we see a 3-1 or a plus 350 price out of him. Yeah. If he's lurking, I think he'll probably just be a little bit overvalued. I do think he opened at 10, which I thought was a little undervalued. kind of a cheap price on him. So if some people were able to pick off that price earlier in the week, I do think that was a decent price. Just because I think he could be the one that goes off at 3-1. I don't know that we see the same thing out of Larson or Bell, but SVG for sure. Reddick, oh, man, I think he's just probably properly priced there at that 7-1 range. And Chase Elliott, he just hasn't been the fastest car on road courses in a while. Last year his average running position was 17th. He looked to be in the mix last year only because he pitted before there was a caution, so he inherited some track position along with Justin Haley. Other than that, he didn't look necessarily great in practice, in just a poor qualifying. I think he qualified in the 20s there and was just lucky to catch a caution. So I do think we could see a very heavy favorite this week if it's one of those three, Bell, Larson, or SVG. But, picking which one that's going to be at this point in the week is going to be pretty difficult.
So when we go away from kind of that de facto first tier into the second tier of drivers, we look at guys like Martin Truex Jr., William Byron, who we mentioned has finished first or second in 3 of the last 4 road course races. Chris Buescher, who has been the model of consistency. But again, the 17 car of Chris Buescher hasn't shown race-winning speed on these road courses, even if he does have a knack to try and achieve good finishes. Then, of course, there's AJ Allmendinger, Michael McDowell, Ty Gibbs, all priced at less than 20-1. One last thing, by the way, before the floor is yours to talk about some of these guys, I do want to mention that SVG last year did drive a Trackhouse prepared car. This year, he'll be in Kyle League Racing, but keep in mind that he has been outstanding in the Xfinity Series driving for Kyle League this year, and it's not like AJ Allmendinger hasn't had speed when we've gone to these road courses with back-to-back top 10 finishes. So I know that'll be a talking point that some folks will want to harp on, but some of the other drivers, the de facto road course ringers, are drivers with a little bit of a track record on a more traditional road course.
Well, to steelman your point even more, this is the second time these NASCAR drivers are seeing this track. So a lot of people are saying, well, now that these Cup drivers, they've learned more, they'll have a leg up against SVG. Well, who do you think has learned more about stock car racing the last 2 years in NASCAR racing? You think it's William Byron, or do you think it's SVG, who's now running full time in a NASCAR series, learning about how these cars disturb the air, learning how to set up passes, learning how the brake packages work? I think if you can say anyone got better from last year, you could probably say everybody, but more importantly, SVG has gotten more comfortable. So yep. I think that's kind of why we took a little bit of a shot at that 10-1 number, but at 6, I don't think it's worth playing. But to get on some of these other good road course racers, Truex, Byron, Buescher, I would say of those 3 at that 14-1 range, I do think Truex probably has the best chance at winning a race and getting it done. Buescher always seems to just get the most out of his car and just kind of grind a top 10 finish. That's been his thing at these road courses. Byron is, ever since I jinxed him and called him Jimmy Johnson 2.0, we have just not seen speed.
It has been the William Byron summer swoon that we may have to patent, because it's no different than what we saw from the 24 last year before his car came to life when it mattered most in the playoffs.
Yeah, this is something that we've seen out of Hendrick in the past. We've seen it a little bit out of Jimmy Johnson as well, where he wasn't just you start the season, he comes off firing, and then maybe has this mid-season Hendrick lull just in preparation for the playoffs. Some of these races, I don't think it's really that important that you're good at Chicago because this is going to transfer well to a playoff race. That's just not the case. So if because the way Hendrick operates, let's win races and championships, I don't think that they're going to spend a lot of time and money and resources on just making sure they go out and win Chicago. Like if they do, great. But ultimately, the goal is to win championships, a driver championship, and win races. So that could be one of those things that 24 team has fallen into when it comes to. But I do think Buescher is a very solid guy that you could find in maybe a derivative market, a top 10 or a top 5. I haven't quite looked at those markets yet. I'm trying to let the week come to us before we go out and fire. And I do think Buescher will have a decent run. And then AJ Allmendinger, gosh, you never know what you're going to get with this little whippersnapper. Sometimes he can go out there, qualify well.
Look at you making short jokes.
Oh, well, he's just a little firecracker. He's the best radio to listen to in all of
look, AJ, going back to my time on Race Hub, came after me when he was 300-1 a year. He qualified for the playoffs. And I kind of said on the show when he was actually on as a guest, we did a pre-tape that day and said there were better ways to allocate your bankroll than betting AJ to win the championship at 300-1. He did not take kindly to that particular comment. but AJ did not advance to the next round of the playoffs. So technically I was correct.
That would have been funny. Like, listen, at 1,000, AJ, I do think there's some value, but at 300, there's just none. Those are your chances. Sorry, math is math. I can't help you there. And then did we talk about McDowell?
No, McDowell is one always worth mentioning when we come to a track like this.
Him and Buescher are very similar in this respect. If I were to separate them a little bit, I do think that McDowell tends to qualify a little bit better. Also, he's won a road course and led more laps, but Buescher just seems to be really solid. I think because this is one of those places where McDowell has to win. I don't see it happening on a non-road course or a non-plate track. So I think he kind of forces the issue, becomes more of a checkers or wreckers type mentality, whereas Buescher, he can get some solid finishes because he can win on ovals, he can win on short tracks, he can win on 1.5 mile tracks. So that would be the difference between McDowell and Buescher.
I didn't realize either when I look at some of the numbers from recent finishes that Chris Buescher has quietly put together 3 top 5s over his last 4 races. We've seen the improvements that RFK Racing has made at 1.5 mile track. So to your point, it's an interesting situation. And then layer on top of that, Chris Buescher not nearly as desperate to try and get that win because there, at least for him, still is a path that he could point his way in.
Yeah,
unlike Michael McDowell that has to win and get in. I don't think Buescher would risk giving up a top 10 finish to try and dive bomb drivers like Michael McDowell that have a 9% probability of actually sticking
or risk fuel
at key junctures of the race.
Or risk fuel, right? Where the downside risk is a 30th place finish.
Yep.
Where, he can just kind of finish 8th. Whereas McDowell, 30th and 2nd are all the same to him at this point. So he needs to go out there and win races. So just keep that in mind as we approach these playoffs, that there are certain drivers that are going to take that risk to win. And there's other ones that are just going to say, you know what, I'm just going to take my 4 tires and fuel. A top 10 will kind of get us in that right direction. And I can go back and get them next week if I unload with a race winning car.
And of course, that's all a very fluid situation based on how many race winners we have. So, I mean, Absolutely. It's something that you're going to want to pay attention to as the regular season continues to dwindle down in terms of how each race team is going to approach their particular desired outcome each and every weekend if they don't feel they have a race winning car. When we go into the 30-1 contingent, it's drivers like Ross Chastain, Denny Hamlin, Daniel Suarez, Kyle Busch. Denny Hamlin's lone road course win came in 2016 at Watkins Glen. We know he's been better about putting together one lap and putting these cars on the pole. It's been different about Denny trying to be able to sustain it because we pretty much bet Denny every road course thinking that we're going to get CLV and then watch Denny go from relevant to completely irrelevant inside of 5 laps. Kyle Busch, when we look at his season in a nutshell, average running position this year, 17.6, the worst in his career through 19 starts in a season. That nugget comes from Dustin Long in a great article he put out this week. When we start to look at Team Penske, they haven't won a road course since 2018, so we can talk all we want about what their drivers are going to do. Not sure they're going to factor in prominently. And then, of course, Trackhouse, Daniel Suarez, great qualifying effort at Sonoma. Ross Chastain quietly put together top 10 finishes on road courses, but he hasn't, in my opinion, shown race-winning speed. Stop me if you've heard this before, as Ross Chastain continues to hunt for his first podium finish of 2024.
That's shocking. For a guy that you'd put in a championship contender with his success at Phoenix last year in the playoffs as well. This Trackhouse, they just seem a tick off. I know that road courses in the past have been certainly strong suits for both the 99 and the 1, but this year, we just haven't seen them up there leading laps without stealing track position. In the past, we've seen the 1 car go out there and pass cars to take the lead. This year, he's having to steal track position. And whenever you end up in that game, it's fine when you got clean air on the front of that race car, but you find yourself running 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and they tend to drop to right around 10th. So do I think that the 99 or the 1 could get out front here and lead laps? Absolutely. But they're going to have something happen in qualifying that's been different from the past because we just haven't seen the same speed when it comes to, these starting lineups. When it comes to Denny Hamlin, of course, they opened him at 30-1, and misery loves company. So obviously, I nibbled a little bit there, just because I do think he's going to qualify well. And for whatever reason, I like having Hamlin in the stable. He's a guy that cashes tickets except for when he runs out of fuel. He went out there and took it from Chastain. I thought we were going to make money. I'm supposed to be pitching my bet right now, and I don't know if I'm just
now you're talking yourself out. Now you're talking yourself out of a protection bet that we made.
Here's why I like Denny. He's been working on this road course qualifying. He put it on the pole here last year. The track hasn't changed that much. I think his race car is faster this year than it's been last year. I certainly think that, the qualifying last year was not a fluke. He looked really strong in practice. I think he was the next best car behind SVG. So I do think that there's something about the way that he drives this particular track that does give him the ability to qualify in that top 5. And if I've got Denny at 30-1 in the top 5, I don't care what track it's at, even if it's a road course. So Kyle Busch, man, geez. I don't know. Whenever you're betting on Kyle Busch, he's unbettable in matchups at this point.
I agree there. I mean, you can't even consider laying a price with the 8 car in matchups.
I had mentioned maybe a top 5 just because if he's there at the end, he can hang on, but ultimately just an abysmal month or last couple months for this guy. He's gone from people almost feel sorry for him. He went from like the hated guy in the 18 car at Joe Gibbs Racing that was taking bows on Friday nights in the Truck Series.
Here's the deal. People hate greatness. People don't hate drivers that don't finish on the lead lap.
Yeah. And then kind of bitch about it. Like, he doesn't look happy. I've never seen, someone's telling a story. Oh, I can't tell where this story came from, but Kyle, someone had, it was at a race and a person asked Kyle to sign something like a checkered flag, and he doesn't sign branded material.
It's fair.
So he didn't sign it. Like, he just didn't sign like a flag, like a checkered flag. He's like, no, if it doesn't say Kyle Busch, I don't sign it. I thought it'd been funny if it was like a Ricky Stenhouse picture. Like if Kyle Busch,
that would have been pretty entertaining.
That
might have
landed.
That might have gotten under Kyle's skin. You never know of what kind of reaction you could have elicited there.
Yeah.
So.
I feel like I could take a punch from Kyle Busch. But anyway, he's made me a lot of money. And right now I just kind of stay away from him. I don't know what to say. I'm kind of speechless because you don't know how. We haven't even seen him like run. He just runs at the back, steals track position, and then wrecks out. And in cars that I feel like he could keep driving with, like he's just quitting. He's just done. So there's your Kyle Busch handicap for the week. And then Ty Gibbs, I think we touched on him for a second, but this is where Ty Gibbs at this 18 to 25-1 range. We're starting to be able to play him. The 12-1 openers were a little bit ridiculous there for a while. I don't think that super like technical track like this is going to be great for Ty. That's why I've shied away a little bit. But this price at a place like Watkins Glen might be interesting, where you need the horsepower and you need a little bit of road course savvy to get it done. But I don't know. That's my take on the 30-1ers. I just have myself some Hamlin. I'm hoping he qualifies well. And if we find ourselves with a late race restart and he's in the top couple rows, maybe he can get it done.
For sure. And when we look at, the other guys for Team Penske, Ryan Blaney, Austin Cindric around 40. Cindric has been touched up a little bit. His price opened in that 50-1 range, but he hasn't been able to replicate the success he had on road courses or that track type in the Xfinity Series since coming to the Cup. A little bit disappointing there. And then one driver that finished in the top 3 last year, Justin Haley at 100-1. Yes, it was the perfect set of circumstances for him to be able to do so. But even last week, he had a pass-through penalty to start the race, still found a way to race into the top 15. And maybe a driver that you're looking for more at an advantageous price north of 3-1 in the top 10 market for a guy who is clearly getting the most out of his equipment.
Absolutely.
And in my opinion, should be poised for a bigger seat at a more prominent race team as he tries to restore his name. Shout out to Josh Berry, who will take over the 21 car. If there was one of the most depressing things that you could see in the NASCAR community, it was watching Harrison Burton be a de facto gracious loser. Although from a stylist standpoint, I'm not sure what hat Harrison Burton needed on his head when he was going through that. But you always hate to see drivers lose their seat. Sometimes it increases the fire in your belly, though, to try and get back into a prominent ride. We'll wave the green-white checkered flag on stage 2 and head into stage 3. But before we do so, I want to encourage all of you out there listening to this very fine program to go to Apple Podcasts, rate, review, subscribe, 5-star reviews, always appreciated and encouraged as Bet the Board as a podcast brand inches closer to their 700th episode ever. Amazing that we've done this much in the way of content, going all the way back to 2014. You can follow Chris on social media at ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me there. But most importantly, as always, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Plenty of great college football content as well. For all of you folks during summer vacation, we dropped the Big 12 earlier this week. 2.5 hours, layered onto 2.5 hours of ACC coverage. And Werme will get into your beloved Big 10 next week. So you'll have to tune in and hear what we have to say about
how many teams are in the Big
Blue.
How many teams are in the Big 10 now?
About 37, but I'm not sure we'll cover all 37 of them because the bottom of that conference actually looks like pure unadulterated garbage, and I don't think it'll be that competitive, but we'll see exactly what we decide to do. Stage 3 today, interesting topic, and some of it gets derived from the commentary and the feedback that we get from you, our loyal listeners, and the NASCAR betting community overall on social media. And it's about kind of building your race card. It's something that we talked about early in the season for bettors that hadn't quite been indoctrinated into, betting races on a week in, week out basis. Like we talked about at the top, I don't think anybody would argue with us saying that the 11 car was the car to beat. But in NASCAR, it doesn't matter if you are the car to beat with 20 laps to go, 15 laps to go, or 2 laps to go. Until that white flag is waving in the air and you get the checkered flag at the end of the race, you don't get to cash tickets. So when we look at trying to build some of these race cards, yes, you want to find the fastest drivers, but I also think it's important not to put all of your eggs necessarily in one barrel unless you want to adopt that feast or famine approach to trying to cash a race-winning ticket.
I think that's the hard part about betting race-winning cars in matchups. Wins are so hard, and some of the decisions you make, it's checkers or wreckers. And whenever that's the case, you run the risk of, let's just say we only had Hamlin outright. That was a big outright for us at that 8-1 opening price, but we didn't have him in matchups because if he ran the way we thought he was going to run, it wasn't really necessary to add a matchup or two because we were going to get such a big payoff if he did win the race. Also on the flip side, he didn't finish inside the top 10. So I don't know how many matchups exactly flipped, but if you're just all in on one guy, I would rather have you take him, maybe even stage 1, stage 2 if the price is right, just knowing that they're going to lead laps. You get a little bit of a, hopefully an inflated payout versus just a head-to-head matchup. But especially when you see someone go off at, plus 350, makes it hard to back that person in matchups. They're going to be overvalued. And, because there's no against price in the top 10 market or the top 5 market.
Not yet, at least. Eventually we'll get to that point, hopefully, with a level of NASCAR sophistication.
Yeah. And so, we you want to make sure you're beating the market when you're playing stuff earlier in the week. And then it's your goal is to protect that bet. And heading into the weekend, we were trying to protect that Denny Hamlin bet. So who are the other guys that we thought were going to run well that maybe weren't overvalued? And we stayed away from Kyle Larson. The comments on Kyle Larson from just a practice perspective from himself and from Cliff Daniels was that they missed it a little. Well, of course, Kyle's still going to be up there, but you can't take that 4-1 price as protection with Hamlin. You had to look other places. You had to look at a guy like Chris Bell, who I thought was really good, not nearly as good as Hamlin, and then maybe find some guys that were running middle of the pack that qualified decent and were maybe matched up against guys that we thought were going to struggle in traffic. And whenever you're betting on someone, you want to make sure that they're able to recover from a mistake. If you're taking guys that don't recover well, for example, Kyle Busch, he doesn't recover well these days. Like if he ends up in a bad situation or ends up back with the squirrels, he doesn't work his way back up. So, I do like a guy like Noah Gragson. I think that he's been kind of undervalued throughout this year and has shown speed, but he's also shown the ability to pass, which is very important. and he's really good if he somehow steals track position. So I've kind of singled out Noah as a guy that we like to back. But the last thing you want when you do have someone like Denny that's the best car is if he's out, for your card to be completely ruined. You cannot have all your eggs in one basket. I don't care if it's Larson at Homestead, Denny at Martinsville, Truex at a road course. Like, this is NASCAR, and it's really hard to win these races. So you want to make sure that you have multiple drivers that you can kind of protect a nice size winning bet. That's what we always look for. It's just, hey, who can we kind of break even with? Last week it was Logano somehow. I have no clue.
Better to be lucky than good sometimes, honestly.
I was embarrassed to tell people that I played it.
Well, I'm glad you're using this form, because it's not like anybody will listen here and the embarrassment will be any less. So.
Yeah, exactly. But sometimes having guys up there and having horses in the race is important. And
now, full disclosure on Logano, we took him at a terrible price. We bet him before we saw where he unloaded. So it was one of those things that we took some numbers that we thought were going to come down. And every now and again, you do catch lightning in a bottle, and that was the definition.
Well, I think we talked about it on the pod. I remember saying,
yeah, you did. You mentioned that we took a number, and we kind of joked a little bit about it. Now, the one thing that was interesting, and you talk about matchups, Logano actually did take some matchup money in those mid-tier matchups on screen. They weren't massive moves, but 10 to 15 cents here or there. And I think that leads us into another topic that we can touch on here and maybe revisit down the road. Professional bettors listen to this show, and I will get absolutely crucified for this, but I have no problem saying it because I think it fits into the way that we build race cards and our overall risk profile. A favorite can offer value in a lot of sports. A favorite can offer value in NASCAR as well. But given the unpredictable nature here and what we see with the current iteration of the sport in the next-gen car, I have no interest more often than not laying massive prices, even with drivers that are in top-tier equipment, against second-tier drivers in that $2, $2.50 range. I mean, Kyle Larson against Ross Chastain gets home for us. We got tremendous closing line value, but I mean, I wasn't going to lay $2.50 on Sunday, and the sequence of events that it took for us to get there. In my opinion, I think you're better off looking to kind of fade one driver across the board more often than not, instead of trying to bet on one driver, because all it takes is something to go wrong for that particular driver and you can win 3 matchups. Whereas on the flip side, you bet a driver in 3 or 4 of his matchups, something goes wrong for him. You go from needing everything to go right to sweep to suddenly 0-4, and you're chasing uphill.
Yeah, you're just talking about one guy to wreck out. If you have a bunch on one guy and that guy that happens to wreck out is your guy, you're going to go 0-3 on those matchups. Whereas if you fade one guy, you have to avoid him winning the race, which if you're fading him, it would have to be a Logano type situation last week where, you didn't think he was going to be that good. And then he goes out there and wins the race. But that's a little bit of an aberration compared to what normally happens in a race week. So I did lay a steeper number. I laid -185 on Josh Berry over Corey Heim. That's the steepest number I've laid this year. I have no problem with like a -150 price.
Where did Heim finish, by the way? Because Josh Berry finished 26th.
Heim finished behind him. He wrecked out before Berry wrecked out. So
perfectly handicapped, because you always count on laying a big price, your driver finishing 26th.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I had Heim at 27th, and that's about where he came in. But the reason I thought this was the case is I didn't think Heim was going to stay on the lead lap. And I was wrong. But I can unequivocally say I was wrong about Corey Heim. Anytime he is driving a 23XI prepared race car on a 1.5-ish so track, I will be looking to potentially bet on him. I thought he did a great job of not making mistakes, keeping all 4 tires under him, and running a very solid race up until he had a little bit of an issue. I don't know which one of the restarts he had kind of fell victim. But this sport, the more you see it, there's no such thing as a lock. You see a lot of young people that are people that just come in, oh, this is the bet of the year. But it's like, yeah. I've seen a lot of bets of the year.
I remember my first race
crazy way. So I think you just, excuse me. Long run, the goal is to make money. And if you're laying steep prices in a sport like NASCAR where you can have a 15-second lead and you're going to re-rack them and run 2 more laps, and if that doesn't work, you're going to do it again and again and again, well, eventually you're going to get bit, and you just don't want to be laying a huge number when that happens.
Yeah, imagine for those folks betting a football game, having a 17-point lead with 6 to go in the fourth quarter, and they just happen to decide, hey, look, we're going to reset the scoreboard.
Yeah.
And
we're just going to go to overtime, and you're tied.
The team that was trailing by 17 is actually going to get the ball in the red zone with a chance to put the game away. That's oftentimes
But if they don't, the other team can go score and win. I know I know that you guys have outplayed them all game, but we're going to give an opportunity. And by the way, if they don't score, we're just going to keep doing this for a while. Maybe we'll throw another team in there. Maybe a team that's just sitting in the stands can win. So,
or in some cases, take your team out and allow the other team
to
go on to victory. But shout out, by the way, to some of your very smart and sophisticated audience on the pre-race poll. They did get us on a winner on a stage 2 bet with Noah Gregson against Corey Heim. It was an interesting sweat for you and I. I know you texted me during the waning stages. I'm going, we got a second lead. We'll see if we can get this home.
Way closer.
A limited offering there, but it's a credit to the listenership and audience that you've cultivated on your Sunday pre-race show. So kudos to all.
I gotta give him a shout out. That was Eric from the Hot Pass podcast. So I will give him, and he's like a thrift store. Excuse me. He's like a thrift store. There's a lot of bad stuff that comes out of his mouth that makes zero sense. But every now and then you find a little treasure in there and you're like, hey, that actually makes a lot of sense. We should do that. So that was in credit to Noah Gregson, did a great job just not getting passed all day. And unfortunately, it cost us Hamlin because that's how Cindric wrecked, was trying to pass.
made his car wide. And I think the comment that you made about him, Payne would say about me, having done as many podcasts with me as he has over the years, hoping to find a diamond in the rough.
Yeah,
but we'll wave the official checkered flag on stage 3 and head to the best bet portion of the program. We've been picking up a little bit of momentum here. You talked about the unpredictable nature of Chicago, and we think we know what to expect, but who are we kidding? We really have no idea until these cars hit Lakeshore Drive. They start to drive around Grant Park, and we get a better indication of who's prepared to win the second running of the Grant Park 165. So what have you found for us pre-week this week, Wormser?
Well, we're going to stick with what we know. I think that if I had to predict one driver to run really well and to maybe even exceed expectations, would be SVG. I'm going to go ahead and take him -110 over Chase Elliott. Chase struggled to qualify here last year. We haven't seen the same kind of speed out of him on road courses, and I think SVG, if anything, has gained some knowledge. I think he's much more comfortable in these cars, and I think that's going to be the best bet. I think that number is going to close a little higher than that. So SVG -110 over Chase Elliott.
Time to snake a little bit of closing line value. Put ourselves in good position to win the race on Sunday. Yep, it is a Superbook limited offering matchup. Unfortunately, we find some of these head-to-head matchups. We wish they were more widely available, but that hasn't quite been the case when we start to dig a little bit deeper. So I know not everyone is able to bet it. Hopefully, those of you that can have been able to take advantage. All right, my friend, I want to wish you a belated happy Canada Day north of the border. A happy 4th of July to our American audience down here. Hopefully there'll be plenty of hot dogs, fireworks if they're legal in British Columbia in your future. But being the expectant father that you are, find somebody else to light off the fireworks. Yeah. The last thing that you want to have to explain to little Worm is why you only have 8 fingers.
Yep.
And so fireworks is the reason behind that. Probably not going to be in anybody's best interest. So anything else you'd like to share with our listenership before we reconvene same time, same place next week?
I got 2 pre-race polls. Well, I'll be doing the away games. I'm headed to Michigan tomorrow. So
can you guarantee me you're going to have good internet connectivity?
I will have
family members' establishment.
I will. That was a catastrophe over at Papa Joe's place. So I will be bringing a big Ethernet cord with me. I'll be setting up shop either at my mom's or my dad's, and make sure that we're able to go through hopefully some winners. But I'm not a big fan of away games. I like being right here at my desk, but time to go see the family, hang out for a week, playing a member guest with my old man. So
why'd you say you're doing 2 pre-race polls? You're going to do one for the Xfinity Series?
Well, I'm going to no, I got 2 weeks. I'm going to be there like this weekend.
Oh, you're gone for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. So I'm there for this weekend. We're having a baby shower, which
isn't that cute?
Yeah. Oh, I got to send you the registry. I need you to buy me something.
Yeah, shocking.
And then
I'll decide what I want to buy for a baby gift. I may go off registry for it. I haven't decided.
I'm going to send it to your lovely wife. I know that I'll get better.
I think she's got your number. I think she's got your number blocked actually. Okay. So it might not work out so well for you.
Nah, I'll find her on social media. Well, yeah. So then the following week, I'm playing in a golf tournament with my old man. So Sunday though, we won't be playing. I'll be watching Pocono. Well, hopefully not a fuel fest. So
yeah, that's the last thing we want is we grind it out. And then, after Pocono, it's the Brickyard before we take a little bit of an Olympic break over.
Yeah. We'll have a guest that week too, right?
In these parts. Yep. We are efforting, and I think we've procured a very good guest for his de facto home track for the Brickyard. So looking forward to getting him into the mix, more details as we get a little bit closer to that race. And hopefully we'll get some bigger names coming on the show as we get deeper into the regular season and the start of the playoffs as well. So safe travels, my friend. Give the family my best as always. And to all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners, be smart, be safe this holiday weekend. But most importantly, with a head-to-head matchup ticket on SVG minus $110 against Chase Elliott come Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.